when Lena Hart said, "Will you stand beside me?" It sounded like the most normal thing in the world. Of course I would. We'd been best friends since we were 12. Since scraped knees, summer storms, and secrets whispered through bedroom walls. Being her maid of honor felt like a title I'd earned just by surviving life at her side. But the moment I saw the ring on her finger, glittering under cafe lights like a tiny promise I hadn't been invited to make, something inside me shifted. I smiled. I hugged her. I told her she deserved everything. And then I went home and stared at my ceiling until dawn, trying to figure out why "happy for you" felt like swallowing glass. The weeks that followed were a blur of dress fittings, seating charts, and late-night calls where Lena's voice sounded bright, breathless, sure. I became a professional at pretending, at laughing in the right places, at saying her fiancé's name, Evan Cole, like it didn't scrape against my throat. I told myself it was just fear of change, just old memories clinging too tight. Then came the final rehearsal. The church was empty except for scattered family and the soft echo of footsteps on polished wood. Lena stood at the altar, practicing vows with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And something in me finally admitted what I'd been avoiding for years. I wasn't watching my best friend get married. I was watching the person I loved walk away from me, without ever knowing she'd been mine in every way that mattered. I didn't plan to tell her. I didn't plan to ruin anything. But when she turned and asked, "Are you okay?" my chest cracked open with a truth I couldn't keep buried anymore. If you're hooked, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss how this ends. And comment below if you've ever kept a feeling like this one buried for years, waiting for a moment that never felt safe. I read every comment, and I'll say hi in the next chapter. Lena and I met when we were 12, on a day that didn't feel important until years later. I'd just moved into town, still smelling like cardboard boxes and uncertainty, when she sat next to me in math class and slid half her sandwich onto my desk without asking my name. "You look like you forgot lunch," she said. That was Lena, decisive, generous, unafraid of closeness. I kept the sandwich. I kept her too. We grew up tangled together in the quiet ways people underestimate. Homework at my kitchen table. Long bike rides that ended with us lying on the grass, staring at clouds and inventing futures we never took seriously. We talked about college, careers, escape. We talked about boys in the abstract, like a topic we'd studied but never practiced. When other girls started pairing off, we stayed side by side, laughing too loud, pretending we preferred it that way. In high school, there were moments that brushed against something sharper, her hand lingering on my wrist when she laughed. The way she always sat too close, even when there was space. Nights when we fell asleep on the phone, breathing sinking without effort. If I noticed the pull in my chest, I named it loyalty. If she noticed it in hers, she called it comfort. We were very good at giving safe names to dangerous feelings. College separated us geographically, but not emotionally. We texted every day, voice noted our stress, flew to see each other whenever we could afford it. She dated seriously for the first time. I didn't. I told myself I was focused on work, on becoming someone solid. When she cried over breakups, I listened with a steadiness that surprised even me. I thought that meant I was strong. I didn't consider that it might mean I was invested in a way I didn't want to examine. After graduation, Lena moved back home. I followed a year later. By then, she'd met Evan. He was kind, steady, exactly the kind of man people describe as good for her. He shook my hand firmly the first time we met and thanked me for being such an important part of Lena's life. I smiled and believed him. I even meant it. We settled into an easy triangle. Dinners, birthdays, holidays. I learned how to be present without being in the way. Lena still came to me first with her fears. She still curled into my side during movie nights when Evan fell asleep early. When I noticed how natural that felt, how right, I pushed the thought away. This is what friendship looks like, I told myself. This is normal. The proposal came on a Sunday afternoon. Lena called me, breathless, crying and laughing at once. I could hear the crowd behind her, the clinking glasses. He asked, she said. I said, I'm so happy for you. And I was, or at least, I believed I should be. That night, alone, I sat on my bed and pressed my palms to my eyes until the room stopped spinning. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, I said yes before she finished the sentence. It felt like a duty and an honor and a penance all at once. I told myself proximity would help, that being involved would make it easier to let go. Instead, every detail pulled me closer. The dress fittings where she stood barefoot, glowing. The late nights planning where our knees touched under the table. The way she still reached for me when she was overwhelmed. I began to notice things I'd never let myself notice before. How her voice softened only with me. How she searched my face after saying something vulnerable, as if my reaction mattered more than anyone else's. I noticed how my body responded. Tight chest. Quick breath. When she smiled at me across a room. These weren't new feelings. They were old ones, finally stepping into the light. I didn't want to disrupt her life. I didn't want to be the story people whispered about later. So I stayed quiet. I practiced restraint like a skill. I rehearsed my smiles. I told myself love was proven by sacrifice, not confession. And for a while, that logic held. Until the rehearsal loomed closer. Until the idea of watching her walk down the aisle stopped feeling symbolic and started feeling final. Until I realized that silence wasn't protecting her. It was protecting my fear. And fear, I was learning, has a way of asking for payment at the worst possible moment. The day of the rehearsal arrived with the kind of calm that feels rehearsed itself. The sky was clear, almost aggressively blue, as if the world had decided to cooperate no matter what was happening inside me. I arrived early, clipboard in hand, doing my best impression of someone useful, someone steady, someone who wasn't quietly unraveling. The church smelled like polished wood and faint lilies. Chairs were half arranged. Voices echoed too loudly in the open space. Lena was already there, standing near the altar with her shoes kicked off, the hem of her rehearsal dress brushing her ankles. She looked relaxed, radiant in a way that made my chest ache. When she saw me, her face softened. Not the public smile she gave everyone else. The private one. The one meant for me. "You're early," she said. "You know me?" I replied. Always prepared. Always hiding. The rehearsal unfolded in fragments. People taking their places. The officiant giving instructions. Evan practicing his vows with a nervous laugh. I watched Lena repeat her lines, her voice steady, but something in her posture felt off. She kept glancing at me, as if checking whether I was still there, as if I might disappear if she didn't keep looking. During a break, she pulled me aside into a quiet hallway, lined with old photographs. Weddings from decades ago, couples frozen mid-laugh, mid-promise. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The question landed harder than anything else that day. I opened my mouth to lie, to say I was just tired, stressed, emotional in that harmless, explainable way people accept. But the words didn't come. Instead, something else rose up, years of swallowed truth pressing against my ribs. "I need to tell you something," I said, her brow furrowed. "You're scaring me." "I don't want to," I said quickly. "That's not what this is. Lena, I can't stand up there tomorrow without you knowing." She waited. She always had. That was the problem. I think I love you, I said. Then quieter. More than a friend. I think I always have. The hallway went silent. The noise from the church seemed to fall away, like someone had closed a door on the world. Lena stared at me, eyes wide, breathing shallow. For a moment I thought she might laugh, or cry, or tell me I was mistaken. Instead, she said nothing. I'm not asking you to do anything, I rushed on. I know you're getting married. I know this timing is terrible. I just needed you to know. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. She leaned back against the wall, pressing her fingers to her lips as if holding something in. Why now? She whispered. Because tomorrow changes things, I said. And I needed you to know who you were changing them for. She shook her head slowly, like she was trying to clear water from her ears. I don't know what to say. I know, I said, and I meant it. This wasn't a confession meant to be answered. It was a release. The officiant called us back. Lena nodded once like she'd made a decision, not about me, but about surviving the next hour. We walked back into the church side by side, our shoulders not quite touching. The rest of the rehearsal passed in a haze. Lena moved through it on instinct. Evan squeezed her hand, unaware of the earthquake under her feet. I stood where I was told, smiling when appropriate, feeling like I'd stepped outside my body and left it behind. When it was over, people hugged, laughed, made plans for dinner. Lena caught my arm before I could leave. Can we talk later? She asked. Of course, I said. But later never came. She texted instead, apologies, confusion, a promise to talk after the wedding. I stared at my phone long after the screen went dark, realizing that I'd done the one thing I swore I wouldn't. I'd changed everything. The morning of the wedding arrived without drama. No rain. No last-minute disasters. The kind of day planners dream about. I woke up early, stared at myself in the hotel mirror, and practiced breathing like it was a skill I might forget. I told myself my job was simple. Stand beside Lena, keep my composure, disappear into the background when the music started. The bridal suite buzzed with laughter and hairspray. Dresses hung from every available hook. Lena sat in front of the mirror while the stylist pinned her hair, her face calm in a way that felt deliberate. When she saw me, already dressed, already steady, something in her expression flickered. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. You look beautiful, she said. So do you, I replied. And we both knew that wasn't the whole truth. We moved around each other carefully, like two people aware of a fragile object between them. The night before had passed with only a few polite texts. No resolution, no denial either. Just the quiet weight of what had been said and not answered. As the ceremony time approached, the room began to empty. Bridesmaids lined up. Someone called for quiet. Lena stood and smoothed her dress, then hesitated. Can you give us a minute? She asked the room. No one questioned it. They filed out, leaving us alone with the hum of the air conditioner and the distant murmur of guests taking their seats. She turned to me slowly. I haven't stopped thinking about what you said, she admitted. I'm sorry if I... Don't, she said. I needed to hear it. I just didn't know how much. She took a step closer. Close enough that I could see the faint tremor in her hands. I don't know what this means, she said. I don't know if I'm confusing fear with something else. I swallowed. You don't have to figure it out right now. I know, she said. But I need to know if it's real. Before I could ask what she meant, she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't desperate. It was careful, like a question asked with lips instead of words. The world narrowed to the soft pressure, the familiarity that felt like coming home. For a moment, everything aligned. Past, present, truth. She pulled back first, breath unsteady. "I need to walk down that aisle," she said, voice breaking. "I need to finish what I started." I nodded. There was nothing else to do. Love doesn't always arrive as permission. Sometimes it arrives as clarity, and then asks you to wait. The ceremony passed in slow motion. Music swelled. Lena walked toward Evan, radiant, composed. I stood beside her, heart racing, face serene. When they exchanged vows, I focused on breathing, on standing, on not letting the truth show. They kissed. Applause filled the church. I clapped when everyone else did. At the reception, I played my role flawlessly. Toasts, smiles, dancing. Lena and I barely spoke. When our eyes met across the room, there was understanding and distance. She left that night as a wife. I went back to my hotel room alone, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally let myself cry. Not because I'd lost her, but because I'd found her too late. If this is the kind of story that gets under your skin, there are other ones just like it on my Patreon. Different women, different nights, the same kind of slow burn truth, with longer chapters and a few bonus scenes. The link's in the description if you ever want to go further with me. After the wedding, the silence settled in fast. Not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet in a way that felt intentional, like both of us were afraid that one wrong word would collapse something fragile we hadn't finished naming. Lena left for her honeymoon the next morning, a postcard-perfect itinerary: sun, water, distance. She texted once from the airport. We landed. "I'm okay." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I'm glad. Take care." Nothing else felt safe. I tried to return to my routine: work, gym, groceries, friends who asked how the wedding went and expected glowing answers. I gave them exactly that. "Beautiful," I said. She was radiant. Both were true. Neither told the whole story. At night, my mind replayed moments I couldn't edit out. The kiss in the bridal suite, her breath against my cheek, the way her hands had shaken before she pulled away. I didn't romanticize it. I didn't build fantasies. I just held it as a fact. Something that had happened. Something that existed whether or not anything came of it. Halfway through her honeymoon, she called. It was late. I almost didn't answer. But when I saw her name, my body moved before my thoughts could interfere. "I didn't want to text this," she said. Her voice sounded different, quieter, stripped of performance. "I didn't want to misunderstand myself." "Okay," I said carefully. "I keep thinking about you," she admitted. Not in a nostalgic way, not in a what-if way, in a way that won't leave me alone. I closed my eyes. "Lena, I'm not asking you to wait," she continued quickly. "I just needed you to know that the kiss wasn't confusion. It wasn't panic. It felt true." I said nothing. I let her speak. "I don't know what that means for my marriage yet," she said. "But I know I can't pretend I didn't feel it." After we hung up, I sat in the dark and made myself a promise. I would not become a secret. I would not become an escape. If she came back to me, it would be because she chose me, openly, fully, without running from anything else. When she returned from the honeymoon, she didn't call right away. Days passed, then a week. I told myself that was my answer. Then she showed up at my door. No warning, no apology. Just Lena, standing there in jeans and a sweater, eyes tired but clear. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside and let her in. Lena stood in my living room like someone who had crossed a long distance without realizing how far she'd gone. She didn't sit at first. She just looked around, as if the familiar space needed to reintroduce itself. I waited. I had learned that pressing her never led anywhere good, I ended it, she said finally. The words didn't land all at once. They unfolded slowly, like something fragile being unwrapped. I couldn't come back and pretend, she continued. I couldn't keep living inside something that felt unfinished. I nodded, careful not to reach for her. Was it about me? She shook her head. It was about honesty, about realizing I'd confused safety with love. She looked at me then, really looked at me. You were never the disruption. You were the constant. We talked for hours, about childhood, about how we'd always circled each other without knowing why, about how easy it had been to call it friendship, because no one questions that word. She told me she'd loved Evan in a way that felt right on paper, shared values, mutual respect, a future that made sense. But something essential had always been missing, and she'd assumed that was normal. I thought love was supposed to be calm, she said. I didn't know it could be this clear. I told her about my fear, about choosing silence because it felt noble, about how loving her had become a quiet habit I'd never broken. We didn't dramatize it. We didn't rewrite the past. We just let it sit between us, honest and unadorned. When she reached for my hand, it wasn't rushed. It was steady, intentional. I felt the difference immediately. I'm not asking you to fix anything, she said. I've already done the hard part. I just want to know if there's space for us, now, as we are. I squeezed her hand. There is. That night, she didn't stay. Not because we didn't want to cross that line, but because we wanted to cross it awake. Clear. Chosen. When she left, I stood by the door and felt something unfamiliar settle into me. Not anticipation, not anxiety, but peace. Love, this time, didn't feel like something I was bracing for. It felt like something I was stepping into. We didn't announce anything. There was no moment where the world needed to be informed. What changed happened quietly, in decisions so small they felt almost ordinary. Morning texts that didn't apologize for existing. Coffee dates that weren't framed as catching up. A shared understanding that this time, neither of us was pretending. Lena moved carefully at first. Not away from me, but toward herself. She told her family the truth without spectacle. Some responded with confusion. Others with relief they didn't know how to explain. A few needed time. She gave it to them, without shrinking. Watching her do that made something in me recalibrate. I wasn't rescuing her from a mistake. I was witnessing her step into alignment. We talked constantly, about boundaries, about fear, about the guilt that surfaced unexpectedly, like muscle memory. She admitted there were nights she woke up panicked, wondering if she'd destroyed something irreversible. I told her I wasn't here to replace anything, only to be present for what was real now. We learned how to say the difficult things early, before they calcified into silence. The first time we held hands in public, it was accidental. Standing in line at a bookstore, she reached for me without looking, fingers finding mine with the same ease they always had. It took a second before either of us realized. When we did, neither of us pulled away. The simplicity of it almost made me laugh. This was the thing we'd been avoiding for years. We took it slow, not because the feeling wasn't there, but because we respected it too much to rush. Affection grew in deliberate layers. Shared dinners, long walks, evenings on my couch with our legs tangled like they'd always been meant to be that way. When we finally kissed again, it didn't feel like discovery. It felt like recognition. There were moments of doubt. Of course there were. Love doesn't erase history, it integrates it. But every time uncertainty crept in, we returned to the same question. Are we more honest together than we were apart? The answer never wavered. One night, weeks later, Lena said softly, "I wish I'd known sooner." I shook my head. We knew. We just weren't ready. She smiled at that. The kind of smile that doesn't ask for reassurance. The kind that rests. Choosing each other didn't feel dramatic. It felt inevitable, like something that had been waiting patiently for us to catch up. The first time someone asked, "So, how long have you two been together?" Lena and I exchanged a look that said everything and nothing at once. She smiled before answering. "A while," she said. It wasn't a lie. It was a reclamation. News traveled the way it always does, unevenly. Some people had suspected. Others were genuinely surprised. A few tried to rearrange the timeline to make it fit their comfort. We didn't help them. We learned that clarity doesn't require explanation, only consistency. There were apologies we didn't ask for, awkward jokes we let pass, conversations that stalled when we entered a room holding hands. None of it felt as heavy as I'd imagined. Maybe because we weren't asking for permission anymore. We were simply visible. Lena faced the hardest conversations alone, and then told me about them afterward. Not for reassurance, but for witness. Her parents asked careful questions. Her sister cried and hugged her too tightly. Evan asked for space, which she gave without defensiveness. Closure, we learned, isn't a single moment. It's a series of honest exits. We found a rhythm that belonged only to us. Mornings with coffee on the balcony, evenings cooking badly and laughing about it. Arguments that ended in understanding instead of distance. We were discovering each other without the static of denial, and it felt quieter than expected. Love, unhidden, didn't need to shout. Sometimes I caught Lena watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. "What?" I'd ask. "I'm just relieved," she'd say, "that I didn't miss this." Neither of us believed in fate the way movies sell it, but we believed in timing, in readiness, in the courage it takes to choose the life that fits, even when it arrives late. One afternoon, walking through the park where we used to lie in the grass as kids, she squeezed my hand and said, "I used to think loving you would complicate everything." "And now?" I asked. "And now I know it simplified it." We didn't rewrite the past. We didn't need to. The future was finally speaking in a language we both understood. Moving in together wasn't a dramatic decision. It happened the way most honest things do, by accumulation. A toothbrush that never left my sink. A sweater of hers draped permanently over my chair. Groceries bought with two preferences in mind. One night, she looked around my apartment and said, "I think we already live here." She wasn't wrong. We took our time merging lives, not because we were unsure, but because we respected the weight of what we were building. Love, we'd learned, wasn't proven by speed. It was proven by care. We talked about money, about space, about the parts of ourselves that still startled us when they surfaced. There was no illusion that choosing each other erased complexity. It just gave us a reason to face it together. Some nights, old guilt crept in quietly. Lena would go still, her thoughts folding inward. I learned to recognize the signs. The pause in conversation. The way her shoulders tightened. When I asked what was wrong, she never deflected. "I'm thinking about the hurt I caused," she'd say. We didn't minimize it. We acknowledged it. And then we returned to the present, where neither of us was lying anymore. I had my own work to do. Years of loving her silently had trained me to expect absence, to brace for loss even when it wasn't coming. I had to relearn how to receive love without suspicion, how to trust that she wasn't going anywhere. She was patient with me in the way only someone who knows your history can be. One evening we hosted a small dinner. Friends, laughter, glasses clinking. At one point, Lena leaned in and kissed my temple without thinking. It was an unguarded gesture. Simple, affectionate, unremarkable. That was when it hit me. This was it. Not the grand declarations, not the turning points. This quiet, shared life. Later that night, Curled together on the couch, she said, "Do you ever think about how close we were to missing this?" "All the time," I admitted. She nodded. "Me too. But I don't regret the path. I just understand it now." We fell asleep like that, the past finally resting behind us. Not erased, not rewritten, just settled. It took us longer than expected to say it out loud. Not to each other, but to ourselves. Love had arrived quietly, but naming it carried weight. One night, after a long walk, Lena stopped on the sidewalk and said, almost casually, "You're my partner." The word landed with a certainty that made my chest feel light. Partner meant chosen. It meant visible. It meant not hiding behind old labels that once kept us safe. We began to speak more openly about the future, not in grand plans, but in shared assumptions. Where we might live next year. What kind of home felt right? The possibility of children, spoken with curiosity instead of pressure. It wasn't about replicating a template. It was about designing something honest. There were moments when the past resurfaced unexpectedly. A wedding photo online. A song from the reception. We didn't flinch from it. We let it pass through. Understanding that history doesn't disappear just because you've learned from it. Healing, we discovered, wasn't about forgetting. It was about integration. One afternoon, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, Lena said, "I spent so long thinking love was something that happened to me. I didn't realize it was something I could choose." I reached for her hand. "You chose it when you told the truth." She smiled. "I chose it when I came back." We talked about friendship, how it had been the foundation all along, not an obstacle. How knowing each other deeply didn't cheapen romance. It anchored it. There was no performance between us now, no roles to play, just presence. As the months passed, the question stopped being, "How did we get here?" and became, "How do we keep showing up?" The answer, it turned out, was simple. We kept telling the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Especially then. Love didn't feel like a dramatic ending. It felt like a sentence that finally made sense. The last thing that changed wasn't the way we loved each other. It was the way we spoke about it. To ourselves, to the world, to the quiet moments that no longer needed translation. There was no announcement. No milestone designed for applause. Just a steady understanding that this was our life now, and it fit. One morning, months later, Lena stood in the doorway with her coffee and said, "I used to think the rehearsal was the hardest part." She smiled, thoughtful. But it wasn't. The hardest part was believing I was allowed to want what I wanted. I thought about that often, about how many years we'd spent being careful with something that was never dangerous, only unfamiliar. How easily love can hide inside acceptable words until one brave moment pulls it into the light. We didn't romanticize the beginning anymore. It was important, yes, but it didn't define us. What defined us were the ordinary days that followed. Shared errands, quiet laughter, disagreements resolved without retreat, the relief of not editing ourselves around each other. Sometimes people asked how long we'd been together. The answer changed depending on how honest we felt like being. Months, if we meant romance. Years, if we meant love. A lifetime, if we meant knowing. On the anniversary of the wedding, the one that never quite was what it promised, we stayed home, cooked dinner, opened a bottle of wine. There was no bitterness in it, only gratitude for the clarity that came afterward. Before bed, Lena rested her head against my shoulder and said, "Thank you for telling me the truth when it mattered." I kissed her hair. "Thank you for listening." What changed in the end wasn't the story. It was the courage to stop calling love by safer names. And that made all the difference.